I served my wife divorce papers at her baby shower. My wife Emma and I spent the last 4 years draining our savings account trying to start a family. We went through 3 grueling rounds of fertility treatments that cost me close to $40,000, and every single time the results came back negative, it completely broke our hearts. The doctors told us we fell into the category of unexplained infertility, which basically means there was no biological reason why we could not conceive. It was incredibly stressful on our marriage, but I worked overtime at my logistics company to pay for the treatments and supported her through all the mood swings and crying nights. 3 months ago, right before we were scheduled to start our 4th and final round of treatments, Emma ran out of the bathroom sobbing with a positive pregnancy test in her hand. We both dropped to the floor crying because our miracle had finally happened naturally, just when we were about to give up all hope. Her mother Susan immediately went into full planning mode and practically moved into our spare bedroom to help Emma with her first trimester. Susan never really liked me because I grew up in a working class family, and she always thought Emma could have married someone with old money. But suddenly she was treating me like I was the greatest husband on earth, constantly patting my shoulder and telling me how proud she was of our little miracle. I was so blinded by the excitement of becoming a father that I completely ignored how overly protective they were being about Emma's phone and her medical appointments. Every time I offered to go to the ultrasound, Susan would insist that the clinic only allowed one support person due to new health policies, and she would go instead. I just focused on working extra shifts to rebuild our savings before the baby arrived, and spent my weekends painting the nursery a soft yellow color. The truth came out 2 weeks ago when I was installing a new smart thermostat in the hallway. I needed to download the control application onto all the devices in the house, so I grabbed an old tablet that Emma kept in her nightstand for reading electronic books. When I unlocked the screen, it immediately opened to a text message conversation that made my stomach drop all the way to the floor. The messages were between Emma and a contact named Marcus, who I immediately recognized as her high school boyfriend that she dated before she met me. The most recent message from Marcus said he could not wait to see pictures of his little guy, and asked if I was still clueless about the timeline. I sat on the edge of our bed and scrolled up through months of messages while my hands literally shook with rage. Emma did not get pregnant naturally by some beautiful miracle. She got pregnant because she drove 2 hours to a hotel downtown and spent the weekend with Marcus while I was away at a logistics conference in Chicago. The messages detailed exactly how Susan orchestrated the entire thing because she wanted a grandchild so badly and blamed my genetics for our fertility issues. Susan actually paid for Marcus to rent the hotel room and drove Emma there herself while telling me they were having a mother and daughter spa weekend. They laughed in the messages about how easy it was to fool me and how I was going to work myself to death paying for a child that belonged to another man. Emma even joked that my overtime pay would perfectly cover the private preschool she wanted to send the baby to in a few years. I sat in that nursery I painted with my own hands and cried for about an hour before the sadness turned into a cold and absolute hatred. I took screenshots of every single message and forwarded them to my own phone before putting the tablet exactly back where I found it. I did not confront her when she came home from grocery shopping with her mother. I ate dinner with them and listened to them talk about the massive baby shower Susan was planning at the local country club. I knew Susan expected me to pay the $5,000 catering bill for the shower, so I just smiled and told them to spare no expense because this baby deserved the absolute best. The next morning I took the day off work and went straight to the most ruthless family law attorney in the city. Since the baby was not born yet and I had written proof of the adultery and paternity fraud, my lawyer said we could file for an immediate at-fault divorce and protect my remaining assets. I spent the next 2 weeks acting like the perfect excited father while my lawyer drafted the paperwork and finalized the plan. The baby shower was this past Sunday, and Susan invited about 60 people, including all of Emma's extended family and my parents. The country club ballroom was decorated with expensive balloons and custom floral arrangements that I paid for with my credit card. Halfway through the lunch service, Susan clapped her hands and asked everyone to quiet down so I could give a toast to the mother-to-be. I walked up to the front of the room holding a large gift bag and a stack of printed papers hidden inside a beautiful pink envelope. I looked at Emma, who was wearing a designer maternity dress and glowing under the chandelier lights. I told the room that I had a very special announcement about the baby and handed the pink envelope to Emma. She opened it with a massive smile that instantly vanished when she saw the legal header on the divorce petition and the attached printouts of her text messages with Marcus. She dropped the papers on the floor and started gasping for air while her mother rushed over to see what was wrong. I pulled the microphone off the stand and loudly thanked Susan for paying for Marcus to impregnate my wife because it finally gave me the perfect reason to leave this toxic family forever. I dropped the microphone on the table and walked out of the ballroom while 60 people erupted into absolute chaos. Emma has been calling me from different numbers for 3 days begging for forgiveness, but I already packed my things and canceled the credit card she was planning to use to pay the country club venue. Leaving that ballroom felt like stepping out of a tomb. The air in the parking lot was sharp and cold, but I didn't even put on my jacket. I just got into my truck and sat there for a second, watching the club staff through the massive glass windows. They were scurrying around like ants. I could see the silhouette of Susan's sisters standing up, hands over their mouths. I could see my own mother coming out the side door, looking around frantically for me. I didn't wait for her. I put the truck in reverse and drove. I stayed at a cheap motel 20 miles away that night. I didn't want to go to a friend's house because I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain the shame of it yet. I just sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like stale cigarettes and looked at my phone. It was vibrating so hard it eventually vibrated off the nightstand. 42 missed calls, 118 text messages. Most of them were from Emma. Please come back. It's not what it looks like. Think about the baby. That last one made me laugh. A loud, ugly sound that echoed off the motel walls. I thought about the baby, all right. I thought about how for 3 months I'd been talking to her stomach at night, telling a child that wasn't mine about the world I wanted to show him. I thought about the car seat I'd already installed in the back of my truck. Around midnight, Susan started texting. Her messages weren't begging. They were vitriolic. You are a small, pathetic man, she wrote. You humiliated my daughter in front of everyone we know. You will pay for this. We will take every cent you have. I didn't reply. I just forwarded the screenshot to my lawyer, Sarah. She replied almost instantly. Sleep well. They have no ground to stand on. Paternity fraud is a heavy hammer in this state. Monday morning was the first real day of my new life. I went to the bank as soon as the doors opened at 9 a.m. Emma and I had a joint account where my overtime pay went. There was $12,400 in there. I withdrew $12,000, leaving exactly $400, just enough, I figured, to cover the gas for her to drive to Marcus's house. I also went to the cellular store and took my name off the family plan. I wasn't paying for her to coordinate more hotel meetups. When I finally went back to the house to get the rest of my clothes, I made sure to call the police for a standby. I didn't trust Susan not to try something. When I pulled into the driveway, Susan's Lexus was parked sideways, blocking the garage. She was standing on the porch like a gargoyle. You're a coward, she spat as I got out of the truck, followed by a young officer who looked like like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'm a man who doesn't pay for other men's mistakes, Susan, I said. My voice was flat. I felt nothing for her. No anger, just a deep, oily sense of disgust. Inside, the house was a wreck. Emma was on the sofa, her face puffy and red. She looked smaller than she had at the shower. The designer dress was gone, replaced by an old, oversized t-shirt of mine. She tried to stand up when she saw me. Mark, please, she sobbed. I was scared. We were failing, and I thought, you thought you'd go find a better specimen? I interrupted. I started pulling my shirts out of the closet and throwing them into a duffel bag. I didn't fold them. I didn't care about wrinkles. You and your mother decided I wasn't good enough to father a child, so you cheated, lied, and then expected me to fund the lifestyle for a kid that isn't mine. That's not being scared, Emma. That's being a predator. I love you, she screamed. I stopped at the door of the nursery. The yellow paint looked sickly in the morning light. I looked at the crib I'd spent 6 hours assembling. You don't love people you treat like ATMs, I said. I took my tools from the garage, my clothes, and my electronics. I left the furniture. I left the nursery. I even left the engagement ring she'd thrown at me while I was walking out the door. It bounced off my chest and rolled under the radiator. I didn't even look down. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings. Since I had the text messages where Emma and Susan explicitly discussed the plan, how they timed the hotel stay with her ovulation, how they laughed about the spa weekend cover story, and even Marcus's confirmation that he knew about the pregnancy, the case was as open and shut as a divorce can be. My lawyer filed a motion to have me removed as the legal father on the birth certificate the moment the child was born. In my state, if a woman is married, the husband is automatically the legal father. I wasn't going to spend 18 years fighting for a kid that would always remind me of the worst betrayal of my life. I moved into a small apartment near the logistics yard. It was quiet. No Susan dropping by to criticize my shoes. No Emma crying over a negative test. Just me. I worked 14-hour shifts, not because I needed the money for treatments anymore, but because the silence of the apartment was too loud. Then, the Marcus factor started to crumble. About a month after the baby shower, I got a message on Facebook from an unknown account. It was Marcus. He wanted to talk man to man. I blocked him immediately. 2 days later, a different account messaged me. Look, Susan told me you were sterile, the message read. She said you guys were using a donor, and I was just helping out. I didn't know you were being lied to. Emma told me you guys were in an open marriage because of the issue. Now she's saying I have to pay child support and move in with her. I don't have that kind of money, man. I work at a gym. I can't support a kid. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The old money son-in-law Susan wanted didn't exist. Marcus was a deadbeat who thought he was getting a free pass to relive his high school glory days with an old flame. He didn't want a family. He wanted a weekend in a hotel paid for by his ex-girlfriend's mother. The pressure on Emma started to mount. The country club sued her and Susan for the unpaid $5,000 catering bill since I had canceled the card and filed for divorce before the final payment was processed. Apparently, Susan's old money was mostly tied up in a house she couldn't afford to maintain and credit cards that were maxed out. They had banked on me being the provider forever. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. I kept my $401K. I kept my truck. I got half the equity in the house, which forced them to sell it. Emma had to move back into Susan's cramped 2-bedroom condo. I was at the lawyer's office signing the final papers when Sarah, my attorney, leaned back in her chair. You know, she said, Emma's lawyer tried one last-ditch effort this morning. She tried to claim she was under emotional duress when she wrote those texts. Did it work? I asked. I showed the judge the text where she joked about using your overtime for private school, Sarah said with a thin smile. The judge called it premeditated financial exploitation. You're free, Mark. I walked out of the office and into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from a delivery app. I'd ordered a steak for dinner, a real one, the kind Susan used to say was too heavy for a refined palate. I drove past the old neighborhood on my way to the apartment. I saw a for sale sign in our yard. The nursery window was open. I wondered if the new owners would keep the yellow paint or if they'd scrape it off and start over. I hoped they'd scrape it off. Some things are too poisoned to save. 2 weeks after the house sold, I got one final phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I shouldn't have picked up, but I did. He's here, Emma's voice whispered. She sounded exhausted. In the background, I could hear a baby crying, a thin, reedy sound that pierced through the speaker. He looks just like you, Mark. I don't care what the tests say. He has your eyes. I looked at the framed photo on my mantle. It was a picture of my father, a man who worked 40 years in a steel mill and never lied to a soul in his life. No, Emma, I said, my voice steady. He has the eyes of a man who didn't want him and the mother of a woman I don't know. I hung up and blocked the number. I sat down at my small table, cut into my steak, and enjoyed the silence. For the first time in 4 years, the house was quiet. My bank account was mine, and I didn't have to wonder if I was enough. I knew I was. I was just too much for people who only knew how to take. I finished my dinner, washed the plate, and went to bed early. I had an early shift the next day, and for the first time in a long time, I was working for a future that actually belonged to me. The silence of my new life became my favorite thing about it. No more walking on eggshells, no more wondering why the air felt thick with secrets I couldn't name. I settled into a routine that was boring to anyone else, but felt like a luxury to me. I wake up at 5 a.m., drink coffee in a kitchen that stays clean, and head to the yard. At the logistics company, I was promoted to regional manager. It turns out when you aren't distracted by the crushing weight of a failing marriage and the physical toll of sympathy stress, you're actually pretty good at your job. I didn't hear from Emma for months after that last phone call. My lawyer handled the final distribution of the house sale proceeds. After the mortgage was cleared and the fees were paid, there wasn't much left, about $30,000 each. I put mine straight into a high-yield savings account and didn't touch it. I heard through a mutual friend that Emma's half went almost immediately to paying off Susan's credit cards and covering the legal fees from the country club lawsuit. Then came the child support hearing from Marcus. I wasn't required to be there, but my lawyer suggested I keep tabs on it just in case they tried to pull me back into the orbit. Marcus, true to form, fought it with everything he had. He tried to claim he was coerced into the encounter by Susan. He actually stood in front of a family court judge and argued that because Susan paid for the hotel room, she was the one responsible for the outcome. The judge, a woman who looked like she had seen every brand of human garbage imaginable, was not impressed. The fallout was spectacular. Marcus didn't have a steady paycheck to garnish, so the state started the process of suspending his driver's license. In retaliation, he started posting everything on social media, the real story of how Emma and Susan lured him into their scheme. He posted the address of Susan's condo. He called them professional scammers. I watched it all from a distance, like a car crash in the rearview mirror. Last Tuesday, I was at a hardware store picking up some salt for the water softener when I saw them. I saw the back of Susan's head first, that stiff, sprayed blonde hair that hadn't changed in a decade. She was standing by the checkout, arguing with the cashier about a coupon. Next to her was Emma. She looked older, a lot older. She was holding a car seat, shifting the weight from hip to hip with a wince. The baby was fussy, kicking at a faded blue blanket. It wasn't the designer-clad miracle they had envisioned. It was just a tired woman and a frustrated grandmother in a discount store. I could have turned around. I should have, but I needed to know if I still felt that burning hole in my chest. I walked past them to get to the next register. Emma looked up. Our Our eyes met for maybe 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I saw everything. The regret, the exhaustion, and that flicker of the old Emma, the one who thought she could manipulate the world into giving her what she wanted. She looked at my cart, then at my clean, pressed work shirt, and then at my face. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words died in her throat. Susan noticed her daughter's distraction and turned around, her face twisted into a mask of pure, concentrated venom. "You," she hissed, loud enough for the cashier to blink. "I hope you're happy. Look at what you did to us." I stopped. I didn't get angry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at the baby, then back at Susan. "I didn't do anything to you, Susan," I said. "I just stopped doing things times for times you. There's a big difference." I paid for my salt and walked out. As the automatic doors slid shut, I heard the baby start to scream, and Susan's voice rising in another argument with the cashier. I got into my truck and drove home. I took a long way, passing the park where I used to think I'd take my son to play catch. I felt a small, sharp pang of what could have been, but it passed quickly. That dream was a house built on sand. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on my balcony with a beer. The sun was setting, hitting the glass of the office buildings downtown. My life isn't a movie. There's no big celebration, no second marriage to a swimsuit model, no lottery win. It's just me, my work, and the peace of knowing exactly who is in my corner, which, right now, is just me. And for the first time in my life, that's more than enough. The quiet didn't stay quiet forever. Life has a way of leaking back in, even when you've bolted the door. A year after the divorce was finalized, I started seeing a woman named Claire. She was a dispatcher at a trucking firm I worked with. She was straightforward, wore her hair in a messy bun, and didn't have a mother who lived in her pocket. We went to diners, watched movies, and talked about things that didn't involve biological clocks or status. For the first time, I felt like I was breathing air that wasn't recycled, but the ghost of my old life tapped on the glass 6 months into the relationship. I was at my desk at the logistics yard when my phone buzzed with an email notification from an address I didn't recognize. It was a PDF attachment. I opened it, thinking it was a shipping manifest. It was a photo of a toddler, a little boy with dark hair and a familiar scowl. Underneath it was a single sentence: "He's asking for his daddy." I felt a cold flash of heat go up my neck. I didn't reply. I deleted the email and blocked the address. 2 days later, Claire and I were walking to my truck after dinner when a rusted-out sedan pulled up behind us, blocking the parking spot. The driver's side door creaked open, and Marcus stepped out. He looked like he'd been living on a diet of cheap beer and bad decisions. His gym bro physique had softened into something haggard. "We need to talk, Mark," he said. He didn't sound tough. He sounded desperate. Claire looked at me, then at him. She didn't say a word, just tightened her grip on my hand. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "Get your car out from behind mine." "She's losing it," Marcus said, stepping closer. He smelled like cigarettes. "Emma, she lost the job at the dentist's office. Susan's house is in foreclosure. They're trying to pin the whole thing on me, man. They're suing me for back child support from the day he was born, and the state is coming after my wages. I can't even pay my rent." "That sounds like a Marcus problem," I said, reaching for my door handle. "He looks like you," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "I saw the pictures of you as a kid on her old Facebook. It's some weird cosmic joke, man. He looks more like you than me. Just talk to her. Maybe if you saw him, you'd—" "I'm going to count to 5, I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Then I'm calling the cops. And since you've already got a record for those unpaid fines, I don't think you want them showing up." He stared at me for a long beat, his mouth hanging open like he couldn't believe his bro card wasn't working. He spat on the asphalt, got back in his car, and peeled out, the muffler rattling like a tin can. Claire waited until we were in the truck and halfway down the road before she spoke. "That was him, wasn't it? The biological father?" "Yeah," I said. "That was the specimen they chose. You okay?" "I'm great," I said. And I meant it. I didn't feel a shred of pity for him or for Emma. They had made a bet that I was too soft to walk away, and they had lost everything on it. The final blow came 3 months later. I got a call from my old neighbor, the one who lived next door to the house I'd painted yellow. "Hey, Mark," he said, sounding awkward. "I thought you should know. The house, it's back on the market, but not for sale. It's an estate sale. The bank took it, but there was a fire, just in the kitchen. Not much structural damage, but the smoke ruined everything. I drove by that weekend. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see the carcass of the life I'd tried to build. The house was boarded up. There were scorch marks above the kitchen window. On the curb was a pile of trash the restoration crew had hauled out. Right on top was a sodden, smoke-stained yellow rug, the one I'd bought for the nursery. As I sat there, a car pulled up. It was Emma. She was driving a beat-up rental. She didn't see me at first. She got out and started rummaging through the trash on the curb, pulling out a small wooden horse I'd carved during those long nights of her first trimester. She sat down on the sidewalk, clutching that dirty piece of wood to her chest, and just started sobbing. She looked broken, not just tired, but completely destroyed by the weight of her own choices. The miracle had turned into a millstone around her neck. I looked at her through the windshield. I had the power to roll down the window. I had the power to offer her money, or a place to stay, or a kind word. I had the money in my pocket. I had the stability she lacked. Instead, I put the truck in gear. I looked at the rearview mirror to make sure the road was clear, and I drove away without looking back. I went home to Claire. She had made lasagna, and the apartment smelled like garlic and basil. We sat on the couch, and she told me about her day, about a driver who got lost in Nebraska and a warehouse fire in Ohio. I listened to every word. I don't think about the yellow room anymore. I don't think about the unexplained infertility. I don't think about Marcus or Susan. The nursery is gone. The house is a shell, and I'm finally, truly, at peace. I realized that day that some people aren't looking for a partner. They're looking for a host. And once you stop letting them bleed you dry, they have no choice but to face the cold on their own. I'm not a father. I'm not a husband. I'm just Mark. And that's the best thing I've ever been. Peace is a quiet thing until you realize how much noise you were living in before. 2 years after the shower, my life had reached a point of stability that felt like iron. I wasn't just surviving. I was building. I'd bought a small house, nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom bungalow with a solid foundation and a backyard that didn't need a landscaper to look decent. I didn't paint the walls yellow. I painted them a clean, crisp white. The final act of the drama didn't come with a scream. It came with a certified letter. It was from a law firm representing the state's Department of Human Services. Because Emma had applied for state assistance and Marcus was effectively a ghost with no assets, the state was doing a deep dive into the paternity. They were looking for anyone to foot the bill for the child's medical and living expenses. I called Sarah, my lawyer. "They're fishing, Mark," she said over the phone. I could hear her flipping through pages. "Since you were married at the time of conception, the state wants to see if they can bypass the previous disestablishment of paternity. It's a formality, but we need to shut it down hard. What do I need to do? We're going to give them exactly what they want. A court-ordered DNA test. It's the final nail. No more he has your eyes. No more maybe the timeline was wrong. We put it in black and white, backed by a judge, so no state agency ever knocks on your door again." The day of the test was a Tuesday. I had to go to a local clinic that handled these things. I arrived early, sitting in a plastic chair in a waiting room that smelled like industrial lemon cleaner. The door opened, and Emma walked in. She wasn't holding a car seat this time. The kid, who must have been nearly 2 now, was walking beside her, clutching her hand. He had a head of thick, dark hair and was wearing a shirt that looked like it had been washed 100 times too many. Behind them, Susan hovered like a shadow, looking thinner, her expensive jewelry replaced by a cheap plastic plastic watch. Emma saw me and froze. The kid pulled on her arm, pointing at a toy in the corner. Mama, look! I looked at him. I tried to find myself in his face, just to see if I had been crazy. I didn't see me. I saw Marcus's nose and Emma's chin. I saw a little boy who had no idea his entire existence was a weapon that had misfired. Mark, Emma whispered. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Emma, I nodded. Susan stepped forward, her old venom replaced by a desperate, shaky kind of hope. Mark, look at him. He's a good boy. He's smart. If you could just— Don't, I said. The word was a wall. I'm here for the swab, Susan. That's it. We're being evicted, Susan blurted out, her voice cracking in the quiet waiting room. The condo, the HOA fees, the taxes. We have nowhere to go. Emma's working 2 shifts at a diner, and it's not enough. Marcus is in jail for a DUI and skipped child support. Please, for the sake of the child. I stood up because the nurse called my name. I looked at Susan, then at Emma, who was staring at the floor, tears silent and fast tracks down her cheeks. You should have thought about the child when you were picking out hotel rooms, I said. I went back, let the nurse rub a giant Q-tip against the inside of my cheek, signed the paperwork, and walked out the back exit. I didn't want to see them again. The results came back 10 days later. 0% probability of paternity. My lawyer filed the final decree, a non-paternity order that was so ironclad it effectively erased my name from any legal connection to that child or that family forever. 6 months after that, I heard they moved 2 states away to live with a distant cousin of Susan's who took pity on them. The old money dream was dead. The miracle was just another statistic in a struggling town. I'm sitting on my porch now. Claire is inside, laughing at something on the TV. I have a dog now, a big, dumb lab mix that doesn't care about my bank account or my genetics. Sometimes I think about that yellow room. I think about the man I was, working double shifts and coming home to a woman who was plotting my replacement while I kissed her forehead. I don't hate that man anymore. I pity him, but I'm glad he's gone. The world is big and life is long. If you're lucky, you get one chance to realize that the people who try to break you are usually already broken themselves. I wasn't the one who needed a miracle. I was the one who survived one. I took a sip of my drink, watched the sun dip below the trees, and went inside to join the woman who actually knows my heart. The door clicked shut behind me, and for once, the latch stayed firm. The finality of a court order is a strange thing. It's just a piece of paper with a raised seal, but it felt heavier than all the furniture I'd moved out of our old house. It was the official end of the ghost story. About 3 years after the divorce, I got a promotion to vice president of operations. The company was expanding, and they needed someone who didn't rattle easily. My salary doubled, but I didn't change my life. I kept the bungalow. I kept the truck. I kept the same circle of friends who had watched me go through the fire. I married Claire on a Saturday in October. It wasn't a country club affair. We did it in a small orchard with 40 people and a barbecue caterer. There were no designer dresses that cost a month's rent, and no speeches about miracles. When we stood at the altar, I didn't feel that desperate, clawing need to prove I was worthy of a family. I just felt like a man standing next to his partner. Then, about 4 months ago, I got a message on LinkedIn. It's the one place I hadn't blocked everyone because I needed it for work. It was from a burner account, but I knew the syntax immediately. It was Susan. Emma is sick, the message read. She has a kidney issue. The doctors say it's chronic. We're back in the state, staying in a trailer park outside the city. Marcus won't even answer the phone for a blood test to see if he's a match for a transplant. I know you hate us, but you were always a good man. If you would just get tested, if you're a match, you could save her life. Please, Mark, for the memory of what you once had. I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about the 3 rounds of IVF. I thought about the hormone shots I'd administered to Emma's hip while she cried. I thought about the $40,000 I'd worked 60-hour weeks to earn, only to find out she was spending her spa weekends with a man who wouldn't even give her a drop of blood now that she was dying. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a need to gloat. I just felt a profound sense of distance. It was like she was asking me to donate an organ to a character in a book I'd read a long time ago. I showed the message to Claire. She sat on the edge of our bed, read it twice, and handed the phone back to me. What are you going to do? She asked. She didn't sound jealous or worried. She just sounded curious. Nothing, I said. Nothing? I gave her 4 years of my life, my entire savings, and my heart, I said. She took all of it and tried to pin a fraudulent life on me. I don't owe her my body, too. I deleted the message and deleted the LinkedIn account. A month later, I heard through the grapevine that Susan had tried to show up at my old office. She'd been escorted out by security after she started screaming in the lobby that I was a murderer. My old boss called me to make sure I was okay. I told him I was fine, and that she was a troubled woman from a past I'd buried. The last I heard, Marcus had been picked up on a felony warrant for something drug-related. The kid, the boy who had my eyes, was in the foster system because Emma was too ill to care for him, and Susan's trailer had been deemed uninhabitable by the county. There was a moment, just one, where I sat in my truck and thought about that boy. I thought about his dark hair and his confused face in that clinic waiting room. I thought about the fact that I had the money to help him. I could have been a hero. I could have stepped in and saved him from the wreckage of the people who created him. But I realized that's how they get you. They use your goodness as a hook. They bank on the fact that you'll feel guilty for things you didn't do. If I took that boy in, I'd be looking at Marcus's face every morning at the breakfast table. I'd be tethered to Susan and Emma for the rest of my life. I'd be rewarding the very fraud that nearly destroyed me. I chose not to be a hero. I chose to be a person with boundaries. Last week, Claire told me she's pregnant. We didn't use a clinic. We didn't spend a dime on specialists. It happened on a random Tuesday in our own bed without any stress or schedules. When she showed me the test, I didn't drop to the floor and sob. I didn't feel like a miracle had happened. I just felt a quiet, solid warmth. I took her out for a nice dinner. We talked about how we'd need to turn the guest room into a nursery, and we went to sleep holding hands. I'm going to paint that room light blue, or maybe green, anything but yellow. The boy who is coming will be mine. He'll have my name because he actually belongs to me, not because a lawyer was paid to keep it that way. And when he looks at me, I won't be looking for a lie in his eyes. I'll just see a fresh start. Emma, Susan, and Marcus are ghosts now. They haunt the edges of a life I don't live anymore. I don't wish them ill, but I don't wish them well either. I just don't wish for them at all. I finally reached the end of the story. I'm not the victim, and I'm not the avenging husband anymore. I'm just a guy in a quiet house, waiting for his real life to begin. The birth of my daughter, Maya, changed the way I remembered the past. When I held her for the first time, I didn't think about the $40,000 or the lawyers or the hotel room in Chicago. I realized that the unexplained infertility Emma and I had suffered through wasn't a biological failure. It was a rejection. My body had known, on some primal level, that it wasn't supposed to happen with her. It was waiting for this. Life became about the small, rhythmic sounds of a house that actually worked. The hum of the baby monitor, the sound of Claire humming in the kitchen, the dog's claws clicking on the hardwood. I was 42, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The final ripple of the old life hit 6 months after Maya was born. I was at the grocery store, the same one where I'd seen Emma and Susan years before. I was picking up some formula and diapers, moving fast because I wanted to get home for bath time. As I walked toward the checkout, I saw a woman sitting on a bench near the pharmacy. She was holding a toddler who was screaming, a high-pitched, exhausted sound. She looked up, and I realized it wasn't Emma. It was a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, looking ragged and worn out. But sitting next to her, clutching clutching a tattered plastic bag, was Susan. She didn't look like a gargoyle anymore. She looked like a ghost. Her skin was gray, her clothes were mismatched, and she was staring at nothing. She didn't see me. She was talking to herself, her lips moving in a silent, frantic rhythm. It was supposed to be a boy, she whispered loud enough for me to hear as I passed. A boy for the house. A boy with the money. She had finally lost her mind. The old money fantasy had consumed her until there was nothing left but a shell of a woman sitting in a grocery store, haunted by the grandson she'd tried to manufacture. I didn't stop. I didn't feel a flicker of pity. I just kept walking. That night, I received a text from an old friend who still lived in the same county as Susan's trailer park. He sent me a link to a local news clipping. Emma had passed away. Complications from her kidney condition, worsened by a lack of consistent treatment. There was no funeral mentioned, just a brief obituary that listed no survivors other than her mother. Marcus wasn't mentioned. The child wasn't mentioned. It was like she had just evaporated. I sat on my porch and looked out at the street. I thought about the girl I had married, the one who loved movies and used to make me laugh until my ribs hurt. That person had died a long time ago, long before her kidneys gave out. She had been replaced by a version of herself that thought people were chess pieces. I went inside and found Claire on the sofa. Maya was asleep in her arms, a tiny, perfect weight. I sat down next to them and put my arm around my wife. "Everything okay?" Claire asked, sensing the shift in my energy. "Yeah," I said, kissing her temple. "Everything is finally quiet." I never told her about the obituary. I never told her about seeing Susan in the store. Those people didn't belong in this house. They didn't deserve to be a topic of conversation in a place filled with this much light. I'm an old man in spirit sometimes, but my life is just starting. My daughter has my eyes not because someone said so in a text message, but because when she looks at me, I see my father's kindness and my own stubbornness looking back. I've learned that justice isn't always a gavel hitting a block or a big payout in court. Sometimes, justice is just the slow, steady process of the world moving on without the people who tried to break it. Emma and Susan tried to build a kingdom on a foundation of lies, and the earth simply reclaimed it. I'm still working at the logistics company. I still drive the same truck. But every night, when I turn into my driveway and see the lights on in the windows of my bungalow, I feel like I've won the lottery. The yellow paint in that old nursery is probably gone now, covered by 3 or 4 layers of someone else's life. I hope whoever lives there now is happy. I hope they're honest. And I hope they never have to learn how much it costs to find out the truth. I'm Mark. I'm a husband, a father, and a man who finally knows the value of his own time. The story is over. And for the first time, the ending is exactly what it was meant to be. The years started to move in a way they never had before, fast and full. When you aren't spending every waking second managing someone else's crisis or working overtime to fund a lie, time actually belongs to you. Maya turned 4, then 5. She started kindergarten in a school that I paid for with a normal savings account, not a desperate pile of overtime cash. Every morning when I dropped her off, I'd see the other dads, some looking stressed, some looking bored, and I'd just feel this immense sense of gratitude that my life was simple. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for a phone to ring with bad news. The absolute final chapter of the Emma and Susan saga happened on a rainy Tuesday in November, nearly 7 years after the baby shower. I was in my office at the logistics yard when a social worker from the state called. She sounded young, overwhelmed, and like she'd been reading a file that made her head hurt. "Mr. Miller?" she asked. "I'm calling regarding the estate of Susan Vane. She passed away last week in a state-run care facility." I sat back in my chair, looking out at the rain hitting the loading docks. Susan was gone. The woman who had orchestrated the destruction of my first marriage and the exploitation of her own daughter was finally out of moves. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I didn't feel sorry at all. "But I'm not sure why you're calling me. We haven't been related in almost a decade." "I know," the social worker said, her voice dropping a bit, "but she left a storage unit. The payments were delinquent, and the facility was going to trash it, but they found a small metal box with your name on it. It had a copy of your old marriage license and a letter. The state has to attempt to contact any named parties before disposing of abandoned property." I almost told her to throw it in the trash. I didn't want anything of Susan's in my world, but a part of me, the part that still remembered the man who painted that yellow nursery, needed to see if there was a final confession. I met the social worker at a coffee shop the next day. She handed me a small, rusted firebox. It didn't have a key, but the latch was broken anyway. Inside wasn't a confession. There was no "I'm sorry" or "I regret everything." Instead, it was a collection of photos. There were pictures of Emma from when she was a little girl, dressed in expensive outfits they couldn't afford even back then. There were clippings from society pages Susan had saved, highlighting people she wished she knew, and at the bottom, there was a stack of letters Marcus had sent Emma from prison over the last few years. I scanned one. It was Marcus, begging for money, blaming Emma for his life, and then, in a chillingly casual tone, asking how his kid was doing. He didn't even use the boy's name. He called him the ticket. But the thing that stopped my heart was a small, handwritten note from Susan, tucked into the back of a photo of Emma on our wedding day. It wasn't meant for me. It was a draft of a letter she'd clearly intended to send to Marcus years ago. "He's starting to ask questions," it read. "He doesn't look enough like Mark anymore. We need more money to keep moving. If Mark finds out, the house is gone, and we have nothing. Send what you promised, or I'll tell the cops about the hotel room." She had been blackmailing the biological father while I was working myself to death to provide for them. It wasn't just a miracle gone wrong. It was a multi-layered shakedown. They were bleeding me from one side and Marcus from the other. I walked out of the coffee shop and went straight to the dumpster in the alley. I tossed the box, the photos, and the letters inside. I didn't keep a single thing, not even the photo of my own wedding. I drove home and found Maya sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by Legos. She looked up and grinned, showing off a missing front tooth. "Daddy, look, I built a bridge." I sat down on the floor next to her. I looked at her sturdy little hands and her bright, honest eyes. I thought about the boy, the ticket, who was out there somewhere in the system, or maybe living with some distant relative, forever marked by the greed of 3 people who never should have been parents. I couldn't save him. I had to accept that. You can't fix a foundation that was poured with poison. It's a great bridge, Maya, I said, and I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye. "Why are you crying, Daddy?" "I'm just happy," I said. "I'm just really glad I'm here." That night, after Maya was in bed, I told Claire everything. I told her about the box and the blackmail. She listened, her hand resting on mine. When I was done, she didn't say anything about justice or karma. She just said, "I'm glad you threw it away, Mark. Our house doesn't have room for ghosts." She was right. I'm 50 years old now. Maya is a teenager, stubborn and smart and beautiful. My logistics company is doing well, and I'm thinking about retiring in a few years to travel with Claire. I don't think about the pink envelope at the baby shower anymore. I don't think about the cold silence of that motel room or the yellow paint. Those memories are like old clothes that don't fit, stiff, uncomfortable, and belonging to a version of me that doesn't exist. I'm the man who stayed. I'm the man who left. I'm the man who built a life on the truth, even when the truth was a sledgehammer. And as I sit here in the quiet of my home, watching the moon rise over the trees I planted myself, I know that I didn't just survive. I won. The logistics company finally went through a merger when I was 55. I took the buyout. It was more money than I ever dreamed of having back when I was counting pennies for IVF treatments, but it didn't feel like old money. It felt like clean money. It felt like the physical physical representation of every honest hour I'd put in while the rest of that world was busy trying to scam its way to the top. Claire and I bought a small place on the coast. It's got a porch that faces the sunset and a kitchen big enough for Maya to bring her friends over from college. Maya is studying to be a civil engineer. She likes things that are built to last, things with blueprints that don't lie. I think there's a reason for that. A few months ago, I was cleaning out the garage of the bungalow before we made the final move. I found an old, dusty plastic bin tucked behind the lawnmower. I opened it, expecting old holiday decorations. Instead, I found the blue car seat, the one I'd installed in my truck 3 months before that baby shower. I'd forgotten I even kept it. It had been sitting in the dark for nearly 20 years. The plastic was brittle and the fabric was faded. It was a relic of a man who was willing to love a shadow. I carried it out to the driveway. I thought about the boy. Through some mutual acquaintances who still had an ear to the ground in my old town, I'd found out he'd aged out of the foster system a few years back. His name was Leo. He didn't go by Marcus or Miller. He'd taken the last name of the foster family that had finally stuck by him in his teens. He was working as a mechanic 2 counties over. I sat on the bumper of my truck, looking at that empty car seat. I had his address. I had the means. Part of me wondered if I should find him not to be a father, but just to tell him that for 3 months of his life, there was a man who stayed up late building his crib and painting his room yellow because he wanted him more than anything in the world. I wanted him to know he wasn't always a ticket or a mistake. I picked up my phone. I stared at the map. Then I looked at the house. I saw Claire through the window, laughing at something on her laptop. I saw Maya's graduation photo on the mantle. I realized that going to find Leo wouldn't be for him. It would be for the ghost of the man I used to be. It would be reopening a wound that had finally scarred over into something tough and permanent. Leo had his own life now, one he'd fought for without the help of the people who ruined his start. He didn't need a stranger showing up to talk about a yellow room from 2 decades ago. I walked the car seat over to the heavy-duty trash bin and dropped it in. The lid slammed shut with a final hollow thud. I'm 60 now. My hair is white and my knees ache when it rains, but my heart is light. I sometimes think about the unexplained infertility again. It's funny how life works. If those treatments had worked, I would have been tied to Emma and Susan forever. I would have raised a child in a house of mirrors, never knowing which way was out. I would have died a little bit every day, and I never would have met Claire. I never would have known Maya. The miracle wasn't Emma getting pregnant. The miracle was the tablet on the nightstand. The miracle was the cold, hard courage to hand over that pink envelope in a room full of people. I'm sitting on my new porch now, listening to the waves. The air smells like salt and wood smoke. Claire comes out with 2 glasses of wine and sits in the chair next to me. She doesn't ask what I'm thinking about. She knows. She's seen the way I look at the horizon sometimes. It's a good night, Mark, she says, leaning her head on my shoulder. The best, I say. And it is. Because the truth didn't just set me free. It gave me a life worth living. The man who served those papers at the baby shower is a legend in a town I don't live in anymore. But the man sitting here, watching the tide come in, is just a man. And that is exactly all I ever wanted to be. I'm 65 now, and the house on the coast has become the sanctuary I didn't know I was building toward for 40 years. Retirement isn't slow for me. It's just intentional. I spend my mornings in a small wood shop I built out back, making furniture that doesn't have a single hidden seam or a drop of cheap glue. I like things that are exactly what they appear to be. Last month, Maya came home for a long weekend. She's 24 now, working as a junior engineer on bridge retrofitting projects. We were sitting out on the deck, the sound of the Atlantic chewing away at the shoreline below us, when she brought up the one thing we've never really dissected. Dad, she said, twirling a blade of beach grass between her fingers. I met someone from your old life. Indirectly, I felt a familiar tightening in my gut, but it wasn't fear anymore, just a dull curiosity. The world is smaller than people think. Who was it? I was at a site inspection near the city, the head mechanic on the heavy machinery crew, and his name was Leo. We got to talking over coffee. He mentioned he grew up in the system near your old neighborhood. He said he remembered a guy coming to his foster home once, years ago, just to drop off a toolbox and a mountain of technical manuals anonymously. He said that toolbox was the reason he became a mechanic. I looked out at the water. I hadn't told anyone about that. 5 years ago, right before we moved, I'd tracked down the foster family Leo had been with. I didn't go inside. I didn't introduce myself. I just left a professional grade set of tools and every manual I had from my logistics days on the porch with a note that said, for the boy who likes to fix things. I didn't think he'd remember that, I said quietly. He does, Maya said, her eyes softening. He told me that whoever left it saved his life. He said it was the first time he felt like someone expected him to be more than a mistake. She didn't ask if it was me. She knew. She leaned over and squeezed my hand. You did a good thing, Dad. You gave him the truth of a trade instead of the lie of a family he didn't have. That conversation felt like the very last thread of the old knot finally coming undone. I realized then that I hadn't just protected myself all those years ago. I'd protected the integrity of what a father is supposed to be. By refusing to be a fake father to Leo, I had allowed myself to be a real one to Maya. And by giving him those tools, I'd given him the only thing I had left to offer, the ability to build his own world with his own hands. 2 weeks ago, I got an alert on my phone. A real estate notification for that old zip code. The house, the one with the yellow nursery, was being torn down. The land had been bought by a developer to put up a modern apartment complex. I looked at the photos of the demolition. The excavator had ripped through the front half of the house, exposing the skeleton of the rooms I used to walk through in the middle of the night. I could see a sliver of the hallway where I'd stood with that tablet, feeling my world turn to ash. I watched the video of the roof collapsing, and I didn't feel a single sting of nostalgia. I felt relief. The physical space where those lies were told was being ground into gravel to make a foundation for something new. That's how life should work. You don't build on top of rot. You clear it out and start over. Tonight, the house is full. Claire is organizing a dinner for the neighbors, and Maya is in the kitchen showing them photos of her latest project. The dog is sleeping by the door, and the air is filled with the smell of roasted lemon and garlic. I took a walk down to the water's edge just as the sun was hitting the horizon. I thought about Emma and Susan. I wondered if, at the very end, they understood that you can't win a game when the person you're playing against refuses to stay on the board. I thought about Marcus, likely sitting in a cell or a halfway house, still blaming the world for the fact that he was never man enough to carry his own weight. I picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the surface of a tide pool. 1, 2, 3 ripples, and then it disappeared. I'm Mark Miller. I served my wife divorce papers at her baby shower, and it was the most honest thing I ever did. I lost a house, a savings account, and a version of a future that was never real anyway. But I gained a life where I can look in the mirror every morning and know exactly who is looking back. I turned around and walked back toward the lights of my home. My wife was waiting. My daughter was laughing, and the truth, cold and sharp as it had been, had finally kept its promise. It had kept me warm.